I was in New York yesterday for the unveiling of my mother's stone, and while I was there I met a Mr. Cohen who actually went to the same yeshiva ktana that I went to, Mesivta Rabbi Chaim Berlin. He was in the Beis Medrash around the time that I was, and we shared similar acquaintances. And I wished him well. He did me, and he asked me what I did, and I told him that I am the Rebbe's agent in a place called Farmington Hills, Michigan. Well, he said, I can't help you in that. That's not my style. So I told him even a misnagid, even an anti-chassid can do tshuva. So he asked me, when you do a bris, when you do a covenant, do you do so because Abraham did so, or do you do so because God tells you? So I told him, it's both. God tells you to do that which Abraham did. And he says, well, we're not going to agree on that. So I want to point out to Mr. Cohen, or Rabbi Cohen, just what we learned in today's Torah reading. There is a divine law that we have an obligation to follow the rules of the High Court, and that the judge, whoever that judge might be, that's in charge of the High Court, even if he is incompetent compared to the judges before him, even if he is incompetent compared to the judges in other areas, since he is the judge at that place at that time, we are obligated to follow the rules of that judge. So the question is, why? How is it possible that God would allow us to have to follow the rules of an incompetent judge where there are other judges who are more competent? So whatever the divine providence is, whatever God has in mind from all of this, you see from the words of the Torah that the fact that there is a judge at that time, and he is in the place of the Holy Temple, and he is in charge of the Sanhedrin, we are obligated to follow the words of that judge. Now wait a second. We're following that judge? We're following that judge because God says we have to follow that judge. Why do we have to follow that judge? So two things that you could say. One is that there has to be order and organization. If you don't follow the organization, you're going to deviate another time. You might have to listen this time. And that would be what Rabbi Cohen would probably say. And I say differently. I say that everything is by divine providence, and that judge that has been placed in that holy place at that particular time has been placed there by God, and that the decisions, the independent decisions that judge makes, is as if God himself made them through that judge. And therefore we have no right to deviate from it, because this is the divine plan, this is the divine will. And that's the difference. The difference between myself and Rabbi Cohen is whether we're obligated to listen to the judge because otherwise there's chaos, or whether everything is by divine providence, and since that judge is there at that time and that place, it's as if God was speaking to us through that judge. And so I believe that the judge, that the tzaddik, that the holy person, that the great scholar of our era is a mouthpiece of God. I don't believe that they are great people whom God says you have to listen to because you have nobody else. Because according to that, if you become a great person and you're just as smart or smarter than your teacher, then perhaps you shouldn't listen to your teacher. At least there's a question. In my book, no. If my teacher, my Rebbe, told me to do X, I cannot do Y. The reason for that is because he is the teacher, he's the one I'm obligated to listen to, despite the fact that I have evidence against him. I'll give you, for instance, for many years my Rav was a particular Rav in Brooklyn, and he wanted that all milk that's kosherized for Chalav Yisrael should be should be kosherized by water temperature that's 212 degrees. If it wasn't 212 degrees, it wasn't kosher, as far as he was concerned, l'chatchila. Now, I'm a former, not amateur chemistry student, but I was going to be a chemistry student and perhaps some other stuff. And in the lab where I worked with, where I had some lab in Brooklyn College, one of our experiments was with the Bunsen burner. And the water temperature on the Bunsen burner never went above 95 Celsius. It was boiling intensely, and I couldn't get the water temperature to reach 100. And the reason for that is very simple. Either because of elevation, or more than likely that when you get steam, you also have a release of heat, so I could never really reach 100 degrees Celsius or 212. In other words, basically what I experienced was that it is impossible for me to get to 212 using boiling water, heating water up. And by the way, heating water up is the method that the Talmud says you use in order to kasher things. And so therefore, I knew empirically that 212 for boiling, I'm talking the highest boiling possible, in water was impossible. And I verified that many times. Perhaps at sea level, perhaps under different circumstances, you could get 212. I could never get the thermometer to read 212. And therefore, I don't believe that the Sanhedrin, who boiled water at about 2,800 feet above sea level, I don't believe that they ever got to 212. They got to boiling all right. They got to bubbly, boiling, high degree of boiling. I doubt that the temperature was more than 180, 190 degrees, and the water was boiling, and they used that to kasher. And so, despite the fact that this was my empirical knowledge, I was obligated to listen to my Rav. And I listened to my Rav as long as he was alive. Today, if there is another Rav who would come along and say you don't need 212, I would follow him. But I want you to understand that while my Rav was alive, I followed the rules of the Rav, because that was based upon his understanding, and he was the mouthpiece of God in this generation. The same thing is true when you do, when you listen to a Rav, you listen to a teacher. The teacher is not just himself, but the teacher is the channel through which God communicates to us in this generation. If things change, so then the information changes that will come also through a Rav. And we will be obligated to listen to that Rav. In the meantime, have a wonderful day, Mr. Cohen, and all the rest of us.